When I left town for a few weeks, I trusted my ranch, my father's legacy, to stay safe behind locked gates. But when I came back early, I found a "for sale" sign on my own land, and a stranger showing buyers around. The one behind it all? My HOA president, Karen. The tires of my truck crunched against the gravel driveway as the evening sun dipped below the line of oak trees that bordered my ranch. The air smelled like dust, pine, and home, a smell I hadn't realized I'd missed until that very moment. I had left 3 weeks earlier, heading out on a trip that was supposed to last another 10 days. But something inside me, maybe instinct, maybe suspicion, told me to cut it short. The first thing that caught my eye wasn't the ranch house itself, but the gleaming white "for sale" sign staked into the ground near my front gate. It wasn't small either. A polished board, bold letters, and even a contact number printed at the bottom. My name wasn't anywhere on it. For a moment, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But no, there was the old oak, the weathered red barn, the windmill creaking slowly, every detail matched the image burned into my memory. This was my land. My family's land. The gate was unlocked. That was the second red flag. I had specifically left it chained before leaving, with a coded lock I rarely shared. My gut twisted. As I drove up the path, I saw 2 unfamiliar cars parked near the porch. Expensive ones, the kind that didn't belong on dirt roads or ranch soil. A couple stood near the house, papers in hand, looking around like they were touring a model property. And standing in front of them, gesturing proudly toward the barn, was a woman I recognized all too well. Karen. Homeowners Association president. Self-proclaimed community guardian. A woman who treated power like oxygen, couldn't live without it. She wore her usual smug posture, chin up, hands on her hips, her perfectly pressed blouse screaming authority. I stayed in my truck for a few seconds, just watching her laugh with the potential buyers, waving toward my front porch like it was hers to give away. That's when I realized the depth of it. She wasn't just playing HOA politics this time. She was staging a full-on takeover. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stepped out. She didn't notice me at first, too busy trying to sell a dream that wasn't hers. Every inch of the ranch, from the weathered fences to the sunlit pond, held my memories, my sweat, my father's effort. Seeing someone use it as a sales pitch felt like a punch to the chest. I didn't storm in. Not yet. I wanted to understand just how far she'd gone. The buyers eventually got in their car and left, smiling, probably imagining their life on my ranch. Karen turned, startled, when she finally noticed me standing there. Her confident expression flickered for a second, just a second, before she plastered that fake HOA smile back on. I didn't need to hear the words. Her body language said enough. She was trying to act like she belonged there, like this was a misunderstanding, like I was the intruder. Then, unbelievably, she pulled out her phone. I saw her lips move, her posture stiffen, her tone shift into concerned citizen mode. And that's when I realized she wasn't bluffing, she was calling 911. Standing on my own land. Watching her report me as a trespasser on my own property. The flashing blue and red lights that arrived minutes later turned my quiet return into a scene out of a nightmare. But that was just the beginning. Because what Karen had done wasn't just a petty HOA stunt. It was something deeper, something planned. The wail of sirens sliced through the calm evening like a blade. My ranch, once my quiet escape from the chaos of city life, was now bathed in flashing red and blue. 2 sheriff cruisers rolled up my dirt driveway, their tires grinding into the dust, their lights reflecting off the windows of my home. Karen stood near the gate, clutching her phone like a lifeline, wearing that self-righteous look that only people with undeserved power seem to master. Her voice rose as she pointed toward me, crafting her story before I could even open my mouth. From the way she gestured, you'd think I had broken into her house. The deputies stepped out, cautious but firm, scanning the scene. One rested a hand near his holster, the other approached me with the polite suspicion reserved for trouble calls in quiet neighborhoods. I didn't move. I didn't yell. I just stood there, calm, steady, and disgusted. Because deep down, I knew Karen was spinning something bigger than a simple misunderstanding. She'd done it before. Small things, at first, HOA notices for grass being too tall, letters about unsightly vehicles on the property, complaints about my fencing not meeting community standards. But this was a different league. This was theft wrapped in legality, power abuse wearing a smile. The officer asked for ID. I handed over my driver's license and property documents, copies I always kept in my truck, more out of habit than foresight. As they verified my information, I watched Karen pacing near the mailbox, phone still in hand, whispering frantically into it. She wasn't just calling 911, she was contacting someone else, someone she didn't want the police to know about. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, one of the deputies walked over to her. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the change in her face. That smug confidence cracked, even if slightly. The officer's tone grew sharper, his head turning toward me, then back to her. Eventually, both officers approached me again, this time less guarded. They explained that Karen had claimed she was managing the sale of this ranch on behalf of a previous owner. She had shown them a document, a supposed transfer of ownership, signed and notarized. The world went silent for a second. A transfer of ownership. I hadn't sold this land. I hadn't even listed it. My father had left it to me in his will, years ago. Every square foot of it was recorded in my name. The very idea that a forged document could exist made my stomach twist. The deputies were professional, they didn't accuse, didn't assume. They said they'd have to verify things with the county. I could see it in their eyes though, confusion, hesitation. Because Karen had done her homework. She'd created enough paperwork to make her lie look legitimate. When they finally left, promising to follow up, I was left standing in the fading twilight, the for sale sign casting a long shadow across my yard. Karen didn't say a word as she got into her SUV, slamming the door with that finality that only guilty people manage. Her eyes met mine through the window, cold, unwavering, challenging. That was her message: you might live here, but I control it. For the next few hours, I walked the property. Every gate, every shed, every corner told a story, some of neglect, some of intrusion. The barn door was slightly open. Inside, I found brochures stacked on a crate, printed advertisements for the ranch, photos of my home, and a description that read, "Charming countryside estate, perfect for investors." My blood boiled. She had staged open houses. She had printed flyers. She had brought buyers onto my property while I was gone. And judging by the polished state of the main room, curtains adjusted, counters cleaned, even the scent of lemon polish in the air, she'd been inside. Someone had given her access. Or maybe, she had taken it. When I checked the locks, one of them had been replaced. The deadbolt on the front door was new, the metal shinier than the rest. A small detail, but enough to confirm what I feared. She'd changed the locks to make it look like she had authority here. By midnight, my anger had cooled into clarity. I wasn't going to act rashly. I'd seen what happens when people confront HOA power the wrong way: they get labeled, cornered, and buried in bureaucracy. No, this needed strategy. I pulled out the stack of letters Karen had sent over the years: HOA fines, warnings, mandatory compliance, requests. Patterns began to form. Each document referenced small violations, and every single one was tied to a clause in the HOA's bylaws about non-conforming ownership. The same clause that allowed the HOA to intervene if a property was deemed abandoned or uninhabited for a period exceeding 3 weeks. 3 weeks. That was how long I had told her I'd be away. She had waited until the final day of that period, then filed paperwork claiming the ranch was unattended and therefore under temporary HOA management. From there, she used her position to draft a conditional listing, framing it as a reallocation of community property. She hadn't stolen my ranch overnight, she'd built the theft over months. The realization hit hard. She'd used the system, twisted every word of it, and weaponized it against me. But she'd made one mistake: she didn't expect me to come back early. That night, I sat on the porch under the cold, silent stars. The ranch felt different now, violated, but still mine. I promised myself I wouldn't let her get away with it. By morning, I had a plan. I drove straight to the county recorder's office. The clerk, an older man with tired eyes, typed my property ID into his system. The pause that followed was long enough to make my chest tighten. Then he turned the monitor toward me. There it was, a record of a temporary ownership transfer, filed just 5 days ago, with a digital signature beside my name. Except it wasn't mine. The signature was close, very close, but not exact. Whoever had done it had studied my handwriting, copied it from older documents. It was sophisticated, precise, and dangerous. The clerk frowned, saying they'd flagged the record for verification. But government wheels turned slowly. Too slowly. I needed proof, hard, undeniable proof, that Karen had orchestrated this. And I had a feeling the answers were still here, somewhere on this ranch. As the sun rose over the fields, I walked back toward the barn, noticing something I hadn't seen the night before: faint tire tracks in the mud, leading behind the shed, where the ground sloped toward the old storm cellar. It was padlocked. A fresh lock. And something inside told me, that's where the truth was buried. Morning sunlight spilled across the field, washing the ranch in golden warmth, but it couldn't touch the chill crawling up my spine. The cellar at the back of the property had always been a quiet relic of the past, a leftover from when my father stored preserves and tools during storm seasons. Now, standing before it, I could feel that something was different. The padlock hanging from the handle was new, shiny, untouched by rust, and recently fitted. I crouched down, brushing away the dirt around it. The lock bore a small engraving, CNC Security Services. That name rang no bell. I hadn't hired any security company, and neither had my family. Whoever placed it here wanted to keep something inside hidden and secure. The key wasn't anywhere in sight, but I'd grown up on this land. I knew every back route, every creak, every loose latch. The cellar had an old maintenance hatch beneath one of the nearby tool sheds, a safety access my father had built decades ago in case the main door ever jammed during storms. I crossed the yard, pushing open the creaky door of the shed. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. Behind a stack of old hay bales and rusted farm tools, I found it, the metal hatch half buried in dirt. I pulled it up with effort, and a faint musty smell of trapped air rose from below. The passage was narrow and steep, descending into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight from my truck, wiped my palms on my jeans, and climbed down. The wooden steps groaned beneath my boots as I descended into the hidden room. It wasn't the cellar I remembered. The once empty space had been transformed into something that looked more like an office, temporary, but organized. Folding tables, a couple of plastic chairs, and boxes stacked against the wall. My flashlight beam caught the edges of documents, printed photos, and even a laptop resting on one of the tables. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Someone had been here, recently. I set the light down and started inspecting the boxes. The first was full of glossy pamphlets, for sale, Lakeside Ranch property. My address was printed in bold across the bottom. Another box held purchase agreements, already filled out with multiple buyers' names, deposit amounts, and realtor signatures. It wasn't just one buyer she'd lured, there were several. Karen hadn't been selling my ranch to one person. She'd been auctioning it to whoever paid the highest deposit. Each buyer had been promised exclusive ownership, a cruel scam wrapped in the illusion of official paperwork. And judging by the receipts stapled to the files, she'd already collected thousands in escrow deposits. Every fake document bore the same fake notary stamp. The same handwriting. The same forged version of my name. But the worst part wasn't Karen's name on the paperwork. It was someone else's. Charles Gibson, HOA property manager. I sat back on the edge of a crate, the realization hitting hard. Charles was Karen's nephew, a slick, smooth-talking real estate agent who'd recently started showing up at HOA meetings. I'd seen him a few times, handing out business cards, claiming to specialize in community property transitions. I dismissed him as another self-important realtor. I hadn't realized he was the architect behind the fraud. Karen was the face of the con. Charles was the engine running it. I snapped a few photos of everything with my phone, documents, receipts, and even the new security company label on the lock. Each detail would matter later. As I explored deeper into the cellar, I found something else, a small black device taped under the table. It was a camera. Karen or Charles had installed it to record their transactions. And when I followed the wire connected to it, it led up the wall, disappearing through a small drilled hole that aligned perfectly with the floorboards above. They hadn't just used my ranch to scam people. They'd been recording inside my home. That sickened me. I climbed back out of the cellar, sealing the hatch behind me. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, not fear, but anger building quietly, methodically. Karen had crossed every line imaginable, legal, moral, personal. But she'd also made mistakes. She'd left fingerprints, paper trails, and digital evidence. I wasn't going to destroy it. I was going to expose it. That afternoon, I drove into town to meet someone I knew could help, Sheriff Daniels. He wasn't just the county sheriff, he was an old family friend who'd known my father. I didn't file an official complaint right away. I simply told him I had something serious related to HOA corruption. His eyes hardened the moment I mentioned Karen's name. Apparently, I wasn't the first one to have issues with her. He agreed to come by that evening. But before I could return home, I received an unexpected call, an unknown number. When I answered, a familiar voice came through, smooth and cold. It was Charles. He said he was aware I had entered restricted property. That the HOA had documentation labeling the cellar area as community maintenance access. His tone wasn't panicked, it was threatening, calculated. He told me to stand down or face legal consequences. Then he hung up. That confirmed it, they knew I had found the cellar. When I returned to the ranch, the sun was already dipping low. I parked a distance away and approached quietly. The air felt heavy, too quiet, too still. My gut told me I wasn't alone. As I neared the house, I saw fresh footprints in the dirt, smaller than mine, boot prints with a distinctive sole pattern. Someone had been here while I was gone. The back door, which I'd locked before leaving, was slightly ajar. Inside, my kitchen lights were on. Papers lay scattered on the counter, drawers half open. Whoever had broken in wasn't stealing valuables, they were searching for something. Maybe the evidence I'd taken photos of. Maybe the original documents I'd hidden years ago, the property deed, my father's will, the proof that no HOA clause could override ownership rights. But they didn't find them. Those documents were stored in a metal safe bolted beneath the pantry floor, something only I knew existed. Still, it was clear. Karen and Charles weren't panicking. They were acting fast. Trying to clean up before the sheriff got involved. Night fell over the ranch like a warning. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters. I double-checked the locks, turned off the porch lights, and waited. Every crunch of gravel outside sent my pulse racing. Then, just past midnight, headlights appeared again, slow, creeping up the driveway. I stayed low, peering through the window. A black SUV stopped near the barn. Two figures stepped out, one of them was unmistakably Karen, her blonde hair catching the light. The other was Charles. They weren't sneaking, they were surveying. Talking in low voices, walking toward the cellar entrance. Charles carried a duffel bag, heavy, probably filled with the files I'd left down there. I grabbed my phone, switched to video mode, and began recording from the window. The footage was grainy but clear enough to capture their faces. Karen pointed toward the barn, barking orders at Charles like she was still queen of the HOA board. He knelt near the cellar and began removing the lock. I caught every second of it on camera. They worked quickly, then disappeared inside. I waited a few minutes before stepping outside, silent, keeping my distance. The faint sound of their voices echoed from below, arguing, nervous, desperate. Then came the unmistakable sound of paper tearing, plastic bags rustling. They were destroying evidence. But as I watched, something unexpected happened. Another set of headlights appeared, this time from the opposite end of the property. A sheriff's cruiser rolled into view, spotlight cutting through the dark. Karen and Charles froze in place, still half inside the cellar, blinded by the beam. Sheriff Daniels stepped out, his expression cold, focused, unamused. It was over. Or so I thought. Because as he ordered them out of the cellar, Karen didn't look scared. She looked furious. Like someone whose plan wasn't collapsing, but merely changing shape. Her eyes met mine across the yard, and in that moment, I knew, this wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the start of something much bigger. The moment the sheriff's cruiser lights cut through the darkness, it felt like the world held its breath. Karen stood frozen near the cellar, her pristine blazer catching the red and blue flashes like a guilty spotlight. Charles lifted his hands halfway, not surrendering, but calculating. I could see it in his eyes, he was already thinking of the next lie to spin. Sheriff Daniels' boots crunched against the gravel as he walked toward them. His voice carried that steady authority that didn't need to shout to be obeyed. I stayed a few yards away, still recording from the shadows. The scene was surreal. The same woman who once bragged about protecting neighborhood standards now caught trespassing on private property in the dead of night. Karen's tone was indignant, not scared. She waved her HOA badge like it was a shield. She told Daniels they were conducting a community safety inspection, that she'd received reports of hazardous materials stored beneath the ranch. It was a bold lie, but delivered with the confidence of someone used to bending truth until it bent reality itself. Daniels didn't buy it. He asked for identification, then motioned toward Charles, whose face had gone pale under the spotlight. A duffel bag sat at his feet, the same one I'd seen him carrying earlier. Daniels unzipped it slowly. Inside were bundles of papers, rubber-stamped documents, and a portable shredder still warm from use. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what this meant. He asked both of them to stay put while he called for backup. But Karen wasn't finished. She turned toward me, her voice shrill but eerily calm at the same time. She accused me of setting her up, of harassing HOA officials. The kind of psychological spin only someone like her could manage, weaponizing victimhood when the evidence screamed otherwise. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was right there, in her hands, in her actions, in the stolen papers she was trying to erase. When the deputies arrived, they photographed the scene, collected the duffel bag, and took statements. Karen's protests echoed through the night, but by the time the flashing lights disappeared down the road, she wasn't wearing that smug confidence anymore. Still, deep down, I knew she wouldn't stop there. The next morning, the news spread fast. Small towns thrive on whispers, and mine was no exception. By noon, neighbors were stopping their trucks at the end of my driveway, asking questions, offering opinions, pretending concern. Some were genuinely supportive, others just wanted gossip. But what caught my attention was the sudden silence from the HOA office. No emails. No letters. No phone calls. It was the calm before the storm. By the third day, I got a certified letter in the mail. It was from the HOA board, not just Karen, but the entire executive committee. The letter accused me of creating a hostile environment, interfering with official association duties, and defaming HOA leadership. They were turning the tables. The letter demanded an emergency hearing, one that would determine whether my property remained in good standing within the community. And buried deep in the legal jargon was the threat: if the board found me non-compliant, they could issue fines, liens, and even initiate property seizure proceedings under the same obscure clause Karen had abused before. It was chess, and they just moved their next piece. I took the letter straight to Sheriff Daniels. He frowned, shaking his head as he read it. "They're doubling down," he muttered. He promised that his office was still investigating Karen and Charles, but he also reminded me that HOA disputes often crawled through civil channels, slow, bureaucratic, and easily manipulated. That's when I realized something: the HOA wasn't just a petty neighborhood committee anymore. It was a machine. Karen might have been the face, but there were people behind her, people with influence, people who benefited from the power the HOA quietly accumulated. Over the next few days, I dug deeper. I pulled property records, HOA financial statements, and archived meeting minutes. What I found was staggering. The HOA had been quietly purchasing foreclosed or abandoned lots in the area, cheap, overlooked land that suddenly went on sale after mysterious violations appeared in the homeowner's files. Each of those sales had been managed by the same realtor group, C&G Realty, Charles Gibson's firm. The pattern was undeniable. Karen wasn't a rogue actor. She was part of a system designed to bleed homeowners dry, force them into default, then flip their properties for profit. And my ranch, my family's legacy, was supposed to be their crown jewel. When the day of the emergency HOA hearing came, I didn't go alone. I brought a folder, thick with evidence, printed photos, time-stamped videos, and copies of Karen's fake listings. The meeting was held in the HOA clubhouse, a pristine, sterile space that always felt less like a community center and more like a courtroom. Karen wasn't there, of course. She'd temporarily stepped down pending investigation. But her allies filled the seats, people who'd benefited from her control, who owed her favors, who feared losing their own comfort if the truth came out. The head of the board, a man named Dale, started with a rehearsed tone. He claimed the HOA regretted recent misunderstandings, but insisted that protocols must be followed. He accused me of trespassing on community-maintained land, the same claim Karen had made before. I let him finish, then calmly placed the folder on the table. Photo after photo. The forged signatures. The flyers. The camera from my cellar. The video of Karen and Charles being caught red-handed. The room fell silent. Dale's confident smirk faded as he flipped through the papers. Some of the board members exchanged uneasy glances. A few stood up quietly, walking out. The silence grew heavy, the kind that makes truth too loud to ignore. Then, like a final nail, I showed them one last document, a printed transcript of an email between Karen and Charles, recovered from a laptop cache file I'd photographed in the cellar. It detailed their plan to reassign ownership for resale and ensure HOA board approval retroactively. Dale didn't speak again. The meeting adjourned abruptly. No vote. No fines. No accusations. Just a quiet exodus of people realizing they'd backed the wrong side. But I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. That night, as I drove home, I noticed something strange. A black SUV parked at the far edge of the road, headlights off, windows tinted. It didn't move as I passed, but I could feel eyes following me. Later, when I stepped onto my porch, my phone buzzed. A new message. No name, just a number. It read, "Drop the evidence. Or next time, it won't just be paperwork." I stared at the screen, the night suddenly feeling too quiet again. Whoever sent that message wasn't bluffing. Because the next morning, I found tire marks leading up to my fence, and the gate hanging open, its chain cut clean. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about silencing the truth. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became: Karen was just the surface of something deeper. A network. A cycle of control and fear that reached beyond my ranch, beyond this neighborhood. But they had made one mistake too many. Because this time, I wasn't just fighting for land. I was fighting to bring the whole system down. The night after the threat message, sleep refused to come. Every creak in the old ranch house sounded like footsteps. Every rustle of wind against the window felt like someone watching. I'd always thought fear came in loud waves, gunshots, shouting, confrontation, but real fear is quiet. It settles in your chest like a weight that never lifts. I double-checked the locks twice, then sat by the kitchen window with the porch light off. The black SUV hadn't returned, but I could still see the faint tire grooves in the gravel, carved like scars into the earth. Whoever had cut my gate chain had done it with precision, not vandalism, but a message. By sunrise, my decision was made. I gathered every piece of evidence I had: photos, videos, printed records, and duplicates of the email transcript. I stored them in a fireproof case, one copy for myself and one for Sheriff Daniels. I wasn't going to let the HOA or anyone in their orbit bury the truth. The sheriff met me at his office that afternoon. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from balancing truth against politics. The county was small, everyone knew everyone. And when the HOA held influence over half the town's property taxes, even law enforcement felt the pressure. Still, Daniels listened. I showed him the footage of Karen and Charles breaking into the cellar, the forged papers, and the digital signature records. He nodded slowly, scribbling notes. But when I mentioned the late-night SUV and the text threat, his jaw tightened. He promised to look into it personally. Something about that answer didn't sit right with me. Not the words, the tone. It was cautious. Careful. Almost rehearsed. When I left his office, I noticed a man I didn't recognize sitting near the reception desk, uniformed, but without a name badge. He watched me leave, eyes sharp and cold. Later, I'd learn his name was Deputy Mason. At the time, I just felt a chill crawl up my neck. That night, I hid the fireproof case beneath the floorboards of the guest room, the same place my father once stored cash during hard times. I'd barely sealed it when my phone buzzed again. Another text from the same anonymous number. "Nice try. We know you gave it to Daniels." My stomach dropped. Only 2 people knew about that meeting, me and the sheriff. The realization hit like a slow, sinking stone: someone inside the department was feeding information to Karen's circle. The next 48 hours blurred together. The HOA's retaliation campaign intensified. I began receiving new violation letters, absurd ones this time. Excessive dust accumulation on driveway. Unauthorized agricultural tools visible from the road. Improper flagpole height. Each letter carried fines that stacked faster than cents could follow. It wasn't about money anymore, it was about pressure. Break me financially, bury me legally, corner me psychologically. That was the plan. Then came the sabotage. I woke one morning to find my waterline cut. The ranch well system had been deliberately tampered with, valve loosened, wiring damaged. The barn lights flickered sporadically, and when I checked the generator, the fuel line had been sliced clean. Whoever was behind it knew the property intimately. It wasn't random vandalism. It was surgical. I filed another report with the sheriff's office, but Daniels wasn't there. "He's out on call," the deputy at the desk said, the same deputy I'd seen before, Mason. His smirk told me everything. He didn't even write down my complaint. I realized then that the system I trusted for protection was already compromised. That evening, I drove into town and met quietly with someone outside the official channels, a journalist named Hannah who ran a small independent paper. She'd written a series on HOA corruption years ago before being silenced by lawsuits. I'd kept her card for a reason. When I handed her the folder of copies, her expression changed from curiosity to disbelief. "They're running a property flipping racket under HOA cover," she whispered. She promised to start digging immediately, to verify everything, to follow the money. Finally, I felt a spark of hope, small, but real. But hope is a dangerous thing when your enemies are listening. 3 nights later, while Hannah worked on the story, I came home to chaos. My front door was wide open. The living room torn apart. The drawers overturned, furniture slashed, the scent of gasoline faint in the air. My fireproof case was gone. The floorboards were ripped up. Someone had known exactly where to look. They hadn't stolen valuables. They'd stolen evidence. I stood there in the wreckage, numb, until my phone buzzed again. A single photo appeared, my missing case sitting on the hood of a black SUV. Beneath it, one line of text. "You should have stayed gone." The rage that followed wasn't explosive, it was cold, precise, the kind of anger that sharpens instead of blinds. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to make every single one of them face what they'd built. I drove straight to Hannah's office the next morning. She was pale, shaken, her laptop screen cracked, papers scattered across the floor. Someone had broken in during the night. But she still had backups. She'd already transferred copies of the documents to a cloud drive overseas. They couldn't erase the truth anymore. We decided to go public. Within 48 hours, Hannah prepared an exposé, a detailed report linking Karen, Charles, and multiple HOA board members to fraudulent property transfers and illegal seizures. It included video stills from my recordings, transaction records, and notarized proof of forged deeds. But before the article could go live, Hannah received a cease and desist order, not from the HOA, but from the county attorney's office. The document cited ongoing investigation interference. That's when everything clicked. The corruption didn't stop at the HOA. It climbed higher, into the county offices, into law enforcement itself. Sheriff Daniels wasn't the enemy. He was the scapegoat. The real insider was Mason, the deputy who always seemed to know too much, who had ties to CNG Realty through his brother's construction company. He was the leak. The eyes watching from the inside. That night, Daniels called me personally. His voice was tense, hushed. "They're coming for you," he said. "I can't stop them anymore. Leave tonight. Go somewhere safe." But running meant losing everything, my ranch, my father's legacy, the proof of what they'd done. So instead, I stayed. I boarded up the windows, loaded my generator with fresh fuel, and set up motion sensor cameras around the property. Every step, every sound, every shadow would be recorded. The storm hit just after midnight. Headlights again, 3 vehicles this time, engines idling just beyond the gate. I could see silhouettes moving, flashlights cutting through the dark. They didn't knock. They didn't shout. They were coming to erase everything. The moment the first lock broke, I triggered the floodlights. The cameras lit up, recording everything. I saw Mason leading them. Behind him, Charles, wearing black gloves, face twisted in panic and arrogance. And just behind them, to my disbelief, Karen herself, pale, furious, desperate. They thought this was their final move. But what they didn't know was that Hannah had already scheduled her article for automatic release at dawn. Even if I didn't make it through the night, the truth would. I stood at the top of the porch, heart pounding, watching them spread across the yard like predators circling prey. The line between justice and vengeance blurred. And for the first time, I realized this story, my story, wasn't about a ranch anymore. It was about corruption, power, and the cost of silence. The wind howled through the trees as Mason raised his flashlight toward me, shouting something I couldn't hear over the rush of blood in my ears. Then, everything went black, a power surge, the lights snapping off, the night swallowing us whole. But my cameras kept rolling. And when dawn came, those recordings would expose everything. When the power died, the world turned to silence. The kind of silence that doesn't bring peace, it brings anticipation. The storm had rolled in fast, thunder grinding across the horizon like a warning. I stood frozen in the darkness, the smell of wet dust and gasoline heavy in the air. Somewhere in the yard, boots crunched over gravel. I could hear them breathing, whispering, the hiss of adrenaline-fueled nerves. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was powerless. But they were wrong. I'd been preparing for this. Every motion sensor camera had its own internal battery pack. Even with the power cut, every lens was still recording, feeding to an off-site cloud drive. Every movement, every face, every word. The only thing I had to do was survive the night. Lightning flashed, for a brief second, the whole yard lit up. I saw Mason moving along the fence, hand on his holster, barking silent orders to Charles. Behind them, Karen was pacing near the SUV, clutching her phone, her face twisted in rage and fear. That moment, that single flash, captured her perfectly. The queen of the HOA, self-appointed guardian of community standards, caught trespassing on a property she tried to steal. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then came the crash. The barn door exploded inward, 2 men forcing it open, shouting to each other. I could hear them searching, overturning equipment, breaking anything they couldn't carry. They were looking for more evidence, for the drives I'd hidden, for any proof that tied them to this mess. What they didn't know was that the drives had already uploaded everything, hundreds of gigabytes of data mirrored to Hannah's server. Even if I vanished tonight, the truth would still surface. Rain started falling, light at first, then in sheets. It soaked the yard, blurred the lights of their trucks, made the mud slick beneath their boots. I could hear Karen shouting now, angry, desperate. "Find it. He has backups." The wind swallowed her voice, but her panic carried. Inside, I crouched near the hallway, flashlight in hand, waiting. My pulse was steady now. The fear had burned off, replaced by something sharper, clarity. I wasn't the prey anymore. When the first man kicked open my front door, I didn't move. He stepped inside, gun drawn, flashlight scanning the room. Another followed, his boots dripping mud onto the hardwood. They split up, one moving toward the kitchen, the other toward the stairs. That's when the storm outside reached its peak. A deafening crack split the air, a lightning strike hit the oak tree near the front gate. The power surge blew through their vehicles, shorting out their radios. Their backup lights died instantly. Chaos followed. Shouts, confusion, the blinding rain hammering against metal. I used that moment to slip out the side door, keeping low, silent. The mud pulled at my boots as I moved toward the barn. From there, I saw everything. Karen was now alone near the SUV, soaked, mascara running down her face, trying to make a call that wasn't going through. The signal was dead. No one was answering. For the first time, she looked small, stripped of the authority she'd worn like armor. I wanted to feel satisfaction. I wanted to feel like I'd won. But all I felt was exhaustion. Years of intimidation, forged papers, harassment, all because she thought she could play God over people's homes. And now her empire was drowning in the rain. Then, headlights appeared at the end of the road. For a moment, I thought it was more of her people. But it wasn't. It was Sheriff Daniels. He stepped out of his truck slowly, flashlight raised, weapon drawn. His eyes scanned the chaos, the vehicles, the trespassers, the open gates. Then he saw me. I could see the understanding in his face, the silent apology for everything he hadn't stopped sooner. Behind him came the distant wail of sirens, back up from the next county over. The moment Mason realized they were coming, he panicked. He tried to signal his men, shouting over the storm, but it was too late. Daniels moved faster than anyone expected, tackling him into the mud, disarming him in one motion. The others ran, slipping and falling through the field, headlights cutting through the rain as more cruisers arrived. Karen didn't run. She couldn't. She just stood there, trembling, staring at the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet gravel. When they cuffed her, she didn't resist. She just whispered something to herself, words I couldn't hear, maybe a curse, maybe denial. By dawn, the storm had passed. The air was still, heavy with the smell of wet earth and smoke. My property looked like a war zone, broken gates, flooded barn, shattered glass everywhere. But it was over. The next morning, Hannah's article went live. Front page. National coverage. HOA corruption scandal exposed, county officials tied to illegal property scheme. Within hours, it spread across social media. Karen's face, Charles's documents, Mason's arrest record, all of it. The videos from my security cameras, the footage of them breaking into my property, were embedded in the article for the world to see. No one could bury it now. By noon, the HOA headquarters was under federal investigation. CNG Realty's offices were raided. Dozens of emails surfaced linking them to multiple land seizures, forced buyouts, and bribed officials. Mason's brother's company collapsed overnight. Karen's husband filed for bankruptcy within a week. And Karen herself, the self-proclaimed guardian of order, faced charges of fraud, trespassing, conspiracy, and obstruction. It took months for the trials to conclude. I attended every hearing. Sometimes she looked defiant, sometimes broken, but always the same underneath, a person who couldn't stand losing control. When the judge finally read her sentence, she didn't look at me. She just stared straight ahead, unblinking. 5 years in state prison. It wasn't enough for everything she'd done, but it was justice. After the trial, I rebuilt what was left of the ranch. The repairs took time, and the scars on the land, and in my mind, took longer. But every morning, when I walked the fence line, I felt something different. Peace. No letters. No fines. No fake violations pinned to my door. Just silence, the good kind this time. A few months later, Hannah visited again. Her article had won an award. She handed me a printed copy of it, framed, with a note at the bottom. The truth always finds its way home. I hung it in my office beside a photo of my father, who built this ranch from nothing. For the first time in years, the place felt alive again. The HOA dissolved quietly after the scandal. The new board tried to rebuild its image, but the name Oak Valley had become a warning, a symbol of what happens when power goes unchecked. People still stop by sometimes, curious about that ranch from the news. I usually just smile, offer them coffee, and tell them one thing. It's not about revenge. It's about standing your ground when no one else will. Because sometimes, doing what's right doesn't mean fighting loud battles. It means surviving the quiet ones. And when I stand out on the porch at sunset, the same one where it all began, I can still hear the echo of Karen's voice, sharp, demanding, untouchable. But now it's just a memory carried off by the wind. The ranch stands free. And so do I.